Hello, my name is Richard Lemons. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Center for School Change. I'm honored to join with you via video to share some insights that we at the Connecticut Center for School Change have had regarding your work to try to suddenly pivot and move what had been traditional classroom embedded teaching and learning face-to-face to new forms of distance, online, and virtual learning, basically overnight. It's a monumental task. Many of you are working 24/7 to try to pull this off. We deeply appreciate that work, and we've been having conversations with leaders across the state and across the entire United States as they sort through this task. In our conversations, certain big topics have emerged as central to almost all of the districts as they sort through this. And we want to share those topics with you, not in hope that we're going to provide all the answers, but just to inform you, help you pose the right questions. And I imagine that for some of you, some of these ideas, they're back in the rearview mirror because you already solved them, you've gone on to the next task. But I assume that many of you are still working on this task and that you will be tweaking your systems for the coming weeks as we try to figure this out. First and foremost, let us begin by saying thank you. My team at the Connecticut Center for School Change and we sit in awe watching what you're doing. We've been following social media. We've been watching the posts you've been putting up. We've been seeing the communications many of you sent to your communities. And it is inspiring. It is critical work. And as the whole nation stutters and struggles a bit at this moment and tries to figure out how do we move forward in a day and time where we're being asked to social distance and quarantine ourselves, you've stepped up and you've tried to figure out the next educational system for youth. But more than that, you're providing leadership for entire communities, and that just can't be understated. So we deeply appreciate this heroic work you're doing. Thank you. Thank you. So back to those topics. What were the big issues that we hear districts talking about? Pardon me, I haven't rehearsed this. I'm trying to get this out to you as soon as possible, and I'm going to refer to my notes on occasion. First big topic is accessibility of technology. And obviously, if you have been thinking at all about moving to distance learning in the last few days and weeks, and I know that all of you have to have been dealing with this issue. Clearly, some communities, accessibility is less of an issue than others, but in almost all of our communities, we have young people in families that don't have the right kind of devices to access the learning experiences you want to provide for them, or they don't have the Wi-Fi signals to pull that off. And I know you're working with philanthropies who are stepping up, and thanks to them for doing that. And you're working with local providers to get hotspots into homes, and maybe you've worked out most of the details, but we've heard some rather ingenious strategies that people are using. We've heard of districts putting modems onto school buses and using these empty school buses, deploying them through entire communities. We've heard this especially in rural areas and in urban areas. In the rural areas, one thing that we've heard quite a bit about is placing those school buses in locations that people could drive up to, because you obviously can't get enough signal to cover an entire rural community, but you could get those signals out to church parking lots, and you can allow people to drive up, access that Wi-Fi signal during designated times while still staying socially distant and being and protecting themselves. We've heard of school leaders somehow, and I don't know the technology of this, kind of ramping up the signal on the modems within inside the school so that they reach the parking lot of given schools. Again, providing a space that people could drive up to or even walk up to as long as they're staying 6 feet apart from other individuals and access the signal. And obviously they've worked through the password protection, either providing the password to people as they so that they can come up and use, or changing that configuration to basically a guest login where you enter your information and it brings you into the system and provides you internet access. So these are clearly creative strategies that people are using, and we hope that people keep doing those things, because we need to make sure that young people have access to all the wonderful learning opportunities that we can give to them using online technologies and online resources. I will encourage you, as you're sorting through this, to think carefully about privacy issues. In the last 48 hours, I think we've all become aware of new words like Zoom bomb. Who would have thought that this was an idea? But we have nefarious characters out there that think it is hilarious at best, or they're being malicious at worst, who are figuring out how to crack into particular links. They're dropping into Zoom calls or Google Meets Hangout calls, and they're posting inappropriate things or saying inappropriate things or just trying to be disruptive. And most of these platforms have security features that can mitigate this, if not stop it. So I would make sure that you're having the privacy conversations, the security conversations. Do you use passwords? Do you use on Zoom the waiting room feature, for example, that I hear about? But sort through those, because when you provide a child a device that has a camera on it, or they're using their own and they can see everything, and you're also seeing into their homes, you want to think about how to protect those individuals and those families appropriately. Second big issue that we hear district leaders talking about is what's the appropriate learner management system. Again, this was an expression that many leaders across the United States weren't that familiar with, unless they were in the IT world or their district was already experimenting quite a bit with online platforms. Learner management system is that main framework and platform that educators use to lay out the educational opportunities for students, and students access, and then maybe from that point can reach out into other materials, into other apps, and in other games and other instructional tasks. I have no guidance onto what's the right one, but I just hear that districts are wrestling with this. I also hear that districts are sometimes wrestling with making different choices for different grade spans based upon certain platforms being more appropriate for young people. But deciding on that learner management system seems to be a prerequisite for getting the materials built, getting educators familiar, getting them up online. So good luck in making those determinations. I will say, at this day and time, we have more resources than we ever thought would ever be available. And that is both amazing opportunity, but it's also a big challenge. We have companies offering us free access into their software, into their platforms. I encourage you to be very diligent and very careful in reading through what their offer is, though. We have some bad actors out there who are trying to bait you into bigger contracts. So they offer you something free in the short term, and in order to access that, you're promising something on the back end. And it might be a rather big contract, and it might be multi-year. And I can guarantee you that we're going to have some lean years coming ahead. And I would hate for you to be boxed into platforms that maybe you only wanted to use for a short period of time. So just be careful as you make decisions. Don't jump towards gimmicks, and make sure you have your lawyers look through the small print. The third big issue that seems to be coming up, and I think of it as an important structural one, which will help clarify what this new learning experience is going to be, or what are the time and structure expectations for adults, both teachers and parents, and also young people who are going online or virtual in their learning. Are we going to move the entire calendar and daily schedule online and expect to replicate exactly what would have happened in the day, but just virtually? Or are we modifying in rather significant ways? What is the amount of time we ought to be asking any one child to engage in any given subject? And what's the amount of time for the entire day? Again, some of this is developmental. We don't want kindergartners to be spending as much time as high school students, perhaps, and maybe how we structure the day needs to be very different based upon how independent a child can be based upon their developmental range. We don't have the right answer for you, and I'm not sure anyone does. We hear districts choosing very different options, and partially it's because we're listening to people in different states. We have seen schools and districts begin by basically moving their entire schedule online with very little modification. So students are basically expected to be at school in a virtual way from 8:30 to 2:30. And at lunch break, obviously, they're on their own, and different bathroom breaks, they're on their own. But the idea is that they're walking through the structure of a day. Who knows? Maybe that is the right thing for certain students. I will say that that doesn't seem to be the modal approach. But I have seen examples of it. What I have heard from a small number of leaders in these schools and districts is that it might not be sustainable. It's too big of a burden, that it started off well, but they're second guessing whether to continue that. We've seen districts and schools modify that. Well, let's shrink the amount of time in any one topic, if you're in the grades, or any one subject and course, if you're middle school and in high school, and walk through the regular rhythm of the day, but just do it in truncated chunks of time. So instead of 8:30 to 2:30, maybe it's 8:30 to 11:30, and you're still walking through a rhythm, and there's a structure that's developed. We've also seen in the early phases people not try to structure the day, basically lay out various learning activities that students are engaged in, and they have mechanisms for submitting and receiving feedback. And maybe there's an occasional touch point, teachers calling, teachers sending a video to watch, or maybe the teacher's asking any available student to drop into a small conference or even a classroom-wide conversation, but it has less structure. Don't see as many of those happening, especially at the elementary school level, but again, we're seeing it occasionally occur. So there are a lot of different models. One last thing I'll say is we're even seeing examples of high school, at secondary level, of some districts moving towards what I would say is a more traditional high school enrichment online learning experience, where some districts have been doing this, and basically what they say is students are going to have an online learning experience for 1 hour once a week, and that's with the class and the assigned teacher. But then for the rest of the week, there's a module of assignments, a unit that the student has to work through. There's a variety of learning experiences, and it also has deliverables. It has to things have to be uploaded, and then maybe there are assessments, and the teacher provides feedback. And I think that the idea is that students can handle perhaps some more independence at that high school level. Again, I'm not sure that's going to be the norm for a traditional high school experience in the next 3 months, but I think people are experimenting with that. Fourth issue that districts are talking quite a bit about, and I'm sure you're talking about it also, is capacity. How do we ramp up the capacity of our educators and even parents and students to use these new technologies? I would recommend you get started as fast as possible. Almost all the platforms you are using and all the tools that you plan to adopt have existing training materials. They have videos. They have the materials to somebody could pursue this independently. I would suggest that your IT team start rolling out some training very tailored to your district. I suggest that your IT team start creating office hours to troubleshoot unique problems that people could call into to solve those. And reminder, we have a number of adults who aren't as comfortable using these sorts of technologies, and some of them, if they're like members of my family, are afraid to touch buttons. Like they're afraid they're going to break the device. And I think we have to work them through some of the anxiety and the fear in order to get them on the other side. And because that confidence they have is going to create some creativity on the other side. The last topic, and I will say this is coming up with less frequency, but it's still coming up. How are we going to manage the teaching and learning? How are we going to make sure there's quality? And I say that it's not coming up as much, not because people aren't thinking about it. It's just that they were doing first order, bigger emergency issues. How do we get devices into kids' hands? We'll worry about the quality of it in week 2. And that's probably the right way to think about it, but we are going to have prolonged periods of time in most states of the United States, I predict, most likely for the rest of the school year, where a whole lot of folks are going to be outside of the regular schoolhouse, and we have to be able to tend to quality. So encourage your principals to figure out ways into the instructional core, have them look at the assignments that are being posted for students, have them drop into synchronous learning, the learning that's happening in real time where the teacher is interacting with students via video or audio. do instructional rounds, do a walkthrough at times, occasionally check in and pay attention to the quality. It's not about evaluation right now. It is about supporting teachers as they try on new things, and it's about collecting learning, because somebody's going to figure it out better in your system than other people, and you want to capture those learnings as early as possible so that more people can start doing the more effective practices. So, couple last minutes on some other considerations. Those were the really big topics, but we encourage you to think about some other topics. First, equity. You have children in your community right now who are already the have-nots, not because of anything they did, but because of a society that has economic stratification and has racism and has ableism. And we need to make sure at this time that we're taking care of these children. As the scholar Rich Milner once said or wrote, that we have students in America that are more school dependent than others for success in academics and in learning and ultimately in life. And those children we need to be paying extra care to. We need to be paying attention to who's not checking in, who's not attending online, to who's not progressing the way other students are, and we need to design some interventions quickly and not let the entire spring go by and let gaps begin to accumulate and widen. On implementation, go slow to go fast. This is a monstrous leap that we're doing, and typically it would take us years to do what we're trying to do in a few weeks. Try to manage, try to get smart about this, try to get started, try not to worry about having it perfect at the beginning. Get started so that you can begin to have a feedback mechanism so you can start to figure out what's working. Keep it simple at the beginning and then add on complexity as you go. Don't try to make it too hard, too complex, too fast at first. Be mindful of the historic nature of what's happening in America. It's not just about schooling, and it's not just about math, and it's not just about literacy right now. We have families that 2 weeks ago thought everything was fine. They were stable, they had income, they had housing, and now just 2 weeks later, one or two members of the family have lost their jobs. They are uncertain about when they'll be able to get another job. Food is now not as predictable, and they're even worried about their housing. And students experience that anxiety no matter how well adults mask it. You have kids in your community who are experiencing trauma in some form right now because of all this. Let's take care of people, manage that, and also think about the end user. Think about the fact that kids are sitting in households with parents who are also trying to run a business, who are also trying to work remotely. And if we expect them to manage the learning experience in a structured way for 6 straight hours as if they have nothing else to do, it's going to fail. Also, you have some adults who are managing 2-3 kids in a household. You have teachers who you're going to suddenly expect to be online working with 25 to 30 youngsters remotely, who are also going to be the parent in the same household managing that same learning experience on the other side. We've got to be realistic, and we've got to take care of humans during this process. Last thing that I would just say is get started. Don't, what's that expression? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We're not going to really start learning how to do this well until we start doing it. The learning will come in the doing. Get started. Obviously be smart about it. Take care. Take some risks. And keep learning along the way. Document what's working, document what's not working, pivot away from the stuff that's not working. As the people in the business world tell us, fail fast. I mean, we don't like to talk about failing because we've got kids at the other end, but we're going to have some failures and we're going to have some things that don't work as well. And let's be strong enough to realize what is not working and pivot away from it as fast as possible. You are in our thoughts. Again, we're inspired by your leadership. Keep doing it. Keep taking care of those amazing kids in your care. And if we at the Connecticut Center for School Change can be of any value, please call upon us as soon and as appropriate as makes sense to you. Take care.